Greetings, greenhouse people. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and in an effort to provide this critical information in any way you choose to consume it, we are pleased to offer this discussion in video and podcast formats. My guest today is Josh Henry, a technical specialist with Ball Seed, who's here to share protocols for ornamental pepper propagation and finishing as part of our Tech on Demand series covering key annuals and perennials commercially produced around the world. Ornamental peppers are a fun addition to any plant program, especially in the fall, and the number of varieties and unique colored, although usually inedible, fruit is so cool for consumers to use in pots, combos, or even as decorations. But like many crops, optimal production requires planning, close attention, and specific protocols to avoid losses. Josh is here to help reduce risk in this process. If you like this installment, be sure to subscribe to the Tech on Demand podcast on your favorite app and find dozens, if not hundreds, of Tech on Demand videos on the Ball Seed YouTube channel. But that's enough out of me. Josh, welcome to Tech on Demand. How should our viewers and listeners approach ornamental pepper production?
Thanks a lot, Bill. Yeah, so ornamental peppers are going to be very similar to our traditional peppers that are grown for actual vegetable production. There's a couple of really important keys to success that we're going to cover. And I think one of the big take home messages that I want to drive home is that they really need a lot of heat. Heat and other different inputs like fertilizer, those are some of the things that we have to consider. So let's jump into it. As far as the crop background is concerned, like I said, this is our typical capsicum annuum. It's same as our vegetable peppers. However, a lot of these are bred to be specifically ornamental and not edible. That's one thing that's important to keep in mind. These are going to be seed propagated. One of the really important keys to success here is that you purchase good, high quality seed that has been tested for pathogens. Peppers of all kinds, whether they're edible or ornamental, are susceptible to a lot of seed-borne pathogens. Specifically, Xanthomonas bacterial leaf spot is very, very common in peppers. And so it's important to make sure that your seed has been tested for these types of pathogens to make sure that you don't have issues with that causing bacterial leaf spot throughout the crop cycle. Ornamental peppers can be grown in a lot of different ways. They can be grown in pots, in combos, and also used in the landscape. There's a lot of different genetics that are available from a lot of different breeders. Some have been bred for more compact growth. A lot of our ornamental peppers tend to be on the smaller side. There's also a lot of good drought-resistant genetics, and they're typically used as a fall crop. So a lot of times when you're growing these out, they're going to be grown, propagated in late spring through the summer, and then finished in the fall. For your production timing, it's typically going to take about 3 to 5 weeks to propagate your plugs in about a 288. That's typically the recommendation for most varieties. And finishing is going to take about 7 to 15 weeks. So let's start off by talking about propagation, starting with stage 1, germination and radical emergence. This is going to happen pretty quickly over the course of about 5 to 7 days. As I mentioned, you typically want to aim for a 288 cell plug tray for ornamental peppers. And generally the recommendation is to cover lightly with vermiculite. They don't require light to germinate, so you can get away with getting that nice cover on them just to keep them nice and moist and provide that nice little microclimate to get them germinating more uniformly. You'll want to use a standard propagation media, something with a pH of about 5.5 to 5.8, so a little bit on the lower side. And you want to sow them in a plug tray with an initial moisture level at about a level 4 when you're looking at the 1 to 5 moisture level scale. So fairly moist, but not completely saturated. As you move them out into the greenhouse to start that stage 1 germination, you want to make sure that you give them really nice, warm substrate conditions. Like I mentioned before, ornamental peppers and peppers in general are a very heat-loving crop, and so you want to have temperatures of about 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 to 24 Celsius in the substrate to ensure that they have enough heat to germinate nice and quickly and uniformly. And then for the remainder of stage 1, you want to try and maintain an irrigation level of about a 4. You don't really want to let them start drying out until they've actually come up and you start seeing those cotyledons. It's also important to note that different varieties that are on the market may have different recommendations for the optimal temperature. This 70 to 75 degree range is pretty standard. However, there are some genetics where if you look at the culture sheet, they recommend all the way up to the mid 80 degree mark. So some peppers may even do better with slightly warmer temperatures than this 70 to 75 degree range. Next, let's move into stage 2 with cotyledon expansion. This is going to take about 7 to 10 days. As you start to see those peppers coming up, you can start to back off on the temperature a little bit. Again, they are heat loving, but if you give them too much heat, they're definitely going to turn into very large plugs. So one of the ways that you can kind of control growth as they start to move through propagation is to make sure that they're not getting too much heat. So you can bump that temperature down just a little bit, down to about 68 to 73 degrees Fahrenheit. As far as light levels, you want them to be kind of on the low side at this early stage of propagation. About 200 to 500 micromoles is a good level if you've got your light meter to kind of see where light levels are at. And this is the point where you can start pulling back on irrigation a little bit as well. So, in stage 1, we want to keep it pretty much at a 4 all the time. And now that we have these cotyledons starting to expand, we can bring that down to a level 3 before watering it back up to a level 4. And as far as fertilizer is concerned, you typically want to look at doing about 50 to 100 parts per million nitrogen. And you're going to want to use a typical plug fertilizer, something like a 13-2-13 or a 15-0-15, something that's really high in nitrate nitrogen and low in phosphorus to help keep your plants even more compact. It is important to note that if you're going on the low side of fertilizer, you want to make sure that you're still providing enough micronutrients, because most fertilizers are formulated to provide the optimal level of micronutrients when mixed at about 200 parts per million nitrogen. So if you are using just a generic off-the-shelf fertilizer, you may want to come in every once in a while with a little bit of micronutrients to help boost and make sure you maintain good color on that crop. Moving into stage 3, where you have your true leaf expansion, this is going to take about 10 to 14 days, and this is a good point to make your first PGR application. For peppers, uniconazole is a good recommendation. You can use a low rate. Recommendations are typically in the range of about 1 to 5 parts per million, but this may vary depending on the variety, how much heat, how much fertilizer you're using, and how compact you want to keep your plugs. But starting in this range is going to be a kind of a good place to aim for. For environmental conditions, you want to continue to pull back on temperature, getting down into that 65 to 70 degree Fahrenheit range. And this is a good time to start implementing diff or dip to help control your height. And this basically means, if you're not familiar with the concept, that you can manipulate your night temperatures to be either higher, or you can lower your temperatures right around dawn to help control growth. So peppers are responsive to diff and dip. So it's a good strategy to help keep your crops a little bit more compact. You want to maintain your light levels still in that 200 to 500 micromole range. Irrigation, we can start pulling back even further and letting it dry down to about a level 2 before irrigating back up to a level 4. And with your fertility, you can start to bump it up a little bit at this point. Instead of doing 50 to 100 parts per million, you can go all the way up to about 150 parts per million nitrogen, again, sticking with that high nitrate nitrogen source. And then lastly, as we move into stage 4 or toning, this is where we can continue to maintain these slightly cooler temperatures of 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, but we can definitely start to increase the light levels. As I mentioned before, peppers like a lot of inputs. They like a lot of heat, they like a lot of fertilizer, and they also like a lot of light. So at this point, you can really increase the light up to about 500 to 1,000 micromoles, maintain those good wet and dry cycles, getting up to a level 4 and then drying down to a level 2 between every irrigation. And you can maintain your fertility again in that 100 to 150 part per million nitrogen range. And before the plugs are ready for transplant, you can also do a repeat application of uniconazole, again in that range of about 1 to 5 parts per million. So just kind of to sum up the different keys to success with propagation, you want to maintain, you want to start by using really high quality seed that's been tested and is free of any kind of seed-borne pathogens like Xanthomonas. You want to start off very warm and then start to cool off as germination kind of occurs and you start moving through the stages of propagation. And then you're going to want to use several different methods to control your growth, including drying down between your irrigations, fertilizing with a high nitrate, low phosphorus fertilizer like a 13-2-13, utilizing dip and diff to help manipulate the temperature to help keep your plants compact, and then utilize PGRs like uniconazole at about 1 to 5 parts per million. Next, let's move into transplanting. So once your plugs are ready, whether you've propagated them yourselves or you've bought the plugs in, it's really important to make sure that you plant those plugs as soon as possible. The longer you hold on to your plugs, the more stretch you might see and the more root bound the plugs can become. And this can really impact your quality downstream. So make sure that you get your plugs transplanted as soon as possible. If you do have to hold on to them for a few days, don't forget to fertilize them, because if you've been using low rates during propagation, they're going to be very hungry. They're ready to take off. So don't forget to feed them while they're in the plug tray. Once you do get them transplanted, it's really critical to make sure that you don't skimp on heat, light, or fertilizer. They need all of these inputs to be successful and to build a strong base to support their heavy fruit development later. So it's really important that you use a fertilizer, something that's kind of soft, like a 20-10-20, with lots of ammoniacal nitrogen and lots of phosphorus to feed those lower leaves and build those lower leaf reserves. Because as that plant matures and as it starts to set fruit, those fruit are going to be a huge sink of nutrients, and they're going to basically pull as much nutrients as they possibly can. And if for some reason you run out of nutrients in the substrate, they're going to remobilize the nutrients in those lower leaves, and that's going to cause lower leaf yellowing and lower leaf drop if there's not enough nutrition in those lower leaves. So at transplant, you want to try and get at least 200 parts per million nitrogen of a soft feed like 20-10-20 into the plant. As far as containers and substrates are concerned, you can get away with using a pretty standard peat light media with a pH in the pretty normal range of about 5.8 to 6.2 and a moderate starter charge. So nothing crazy in terms of substrate. For container sizes, the main containers that people will grow in include a 4 to 5 inch, a 6 inch, or a 1 gallon. Depending on the variety, you will typically want to have at least 1 plant per pot for the smaller size pots, but you might go up to 3 plants per pot for a 6 inch or a 1 gallon. This is really going to depend on the variety that you're growing, so I highly recommend that you look at the specific culture sheets for the varieties that you're growing to determine what the optimal number is. You'll also see that the crop time is going to be within that 7 to 15 week range, and that is a very wide range. But again, something that is specific to the variety, and it also depends on your inputs. Like I keep mentioning, peppers are a heat-loving crop. It's all about growing degree days. So the warmer you keep it, the quicker it will be to finish. So keep that in mind. Those inputs are really going to impact how quickly you're going to finish this crop. For fertility and moisture management during finishing, again, you want to start by using a soft feed like 20-10-20 at transplant to get that nice soft nitrogen, that ammoniacal nitrogen, and that phosphorus in those lower leaves. But then as you continue to get through finishing, you want to switch to a cow mag fertilizer, something that's high in nitrate. Typically something like a 15-5-15 is going to be a really great option, applied at a pretty moderate rate of about 150 to 200 parts per million nitrogen. If you're doing pour-throughs, which I highly recommend, you're going to aim for an EC around 1.3 to 3.0. And if you're doing a 1 to 2 dilution, that's going to be a bit lower at about a 0.6 to 0.9. So fairly moderate rates, what you typically see for most crops. As far as moisture management is concerned, you want to irrigate up to a level 4 and down to a 2. Having those good wet dry cycles is essential for maintaining good root health. However, the one thing that's really important to note with peppers, especially as they get closer to their reproductive stage, is that water stress will greatly inhibit flower bud set and will cause flower bud abortion and fruit abortion. So we're growing these peppers for the fruit. It's really important that we don't do anything to compromise the fruit set and fruit quality. So while it's okay to get it down to a level 2, we never want to get it down to a wilting point. As far as light and temperature are concerned, peppers really love high light. So providing high light levels of around 800 to 1200 micromoles is going to be ideal. If you're measuring the daily light integral or the total accumulation of light over the course of the day, you want to aim for a minimum of about 10 to 14 moles and a target DLI of at least 14 moles. 22 moles or greater is going to be ideal. So these are really high light levels, but If we're growing these through the summer, which most of our ornamental peppers are being grown in the summer as a fall crop, you should have no problem getting those really high light levels. And so high light is essential for that quality and flowering. They're not photoperiodic, they're day neutral, but the more light you give them, the better quality plant you'll get. As far as temperatures are concerned, again, heat is really important. You want to maintain a temperature in the 65 to 75 degree range. They can go warmer, but it is important to note that there's too much of a good thing. When you start getting up to 85, 90 degrees, that's where you start getting a little bit of heat stress that may actually cause a delay in the crop. So if you're in the upper 70s, low 80s, that's going to be totally fine. But again, maintaining in that 65 to 75 range is ideal, with night temperatures in the low to mid 60s. For plant growth regulators, because these are an ornamental, we are able to use some of our ornamental specific plant growth regulators on them because they are not intended for food consumption. And so you can use Sumagic, like I mentioned in the propagation portion. 1 to 5 parts per million is a great way to go with peppers. However, if you want to use something that's a bit softer like diminizide or B9, you can go at a rate of about 2,500 parts per million. And you can also use products like paclobutrazol or bonsai as a spray at about 20 parts per million. One of the really interesting things about using paclobutrazol over uniconazole is that it actually won't affect fruit set, whereas uniconazole can actually decrease fruit set by up to 36%. So if you want to make the most of your fruit, you may want to lean more towards something like paclobutrazol over uniconazole. You can also use something like Ethifon or Florel to enhance ripening. And again, this is specifically only for ornamentals, not for food crops, but you can apply it at about 150 to 300 parts per million to get faster ripening. It is really important to note that with Ethifon, it is a stress enhancer. The ethylene that Ethifon releases makes stress worse. So if you have any kind of plant stress going on, it's going to make it worse. So if you've got, any kind of heat stress, drought stress, nutrient stress, you may see yellowing, especially of the lower leaves, leaf drop, and it will also cause any open flower buds to drop. So it's really critical that you make the application at the right time. It's typically going to be about 3 to 6 weeks after flowering, and it's going to yield you 2 to 3 weeks faster fruit color. So if you're not very familiar with Florel or Ethifon, it's important that you make test applications first so you don't accidentally ruin the crop. As far as pests and diseases are concerned, there's quite a few pests that can be an issue. Aphids, broad mites, caterpillars, grasshoppers, mealybugs, spider mites, thrips, and white flies. However, I think that thrips are likely the biggest issue that we see in peppers, partially because they cause a lot of feeding damage, and that can cause direct distortion to the leaves, but also because they spread one of the key diseases of peppers, which is INSV or TSWV. And we'll get into that in a moment. But some of the common diseases that affect ornamental peppers include bacterial leaf spot from Xanthomonas, botrytis, those viruses, INSV and TSWV, stem and root rots caused by Pythium, and then also Phytophthora blight from Phytophthora. One thing I do want to mention is that we do have a nice at-risk crops document that you can see on the slide here, and a link to that slide to just discuss what Xanthomonas is and how to prevent it during pepper production. For bacterial leaf spot, there's in some ways not a lot that you can do compared to some of our other diseases. Prevention is definitely the key to success here by making sure you get good quality tested seed. That is going to be your first key to success. However, even with good quality tested seed, bacterial pathogens happen to be out and about pretty regularly. So there's a lot of things you can do from a cultural standpoint to control bacterial leaf spot. Sanitation is really key here, right? Between crops, you want to make sure that you're physically cleaning surfaces, getting rid of any kind of plant debris, getting rid of weeds, and then using sanitizing agents like quaternary ammonium to sanitize all of your growing surfaces prior to bringing a new crop in. You want to make sure that you break those green bridges by having a nice little gap between crops, just so that there's no chance of pests and diseases jumping from one crop into the next one. As far as bacterial leaf spots are concerned, They primarily spread through splashing during irrigation. So if you do have to overhead irrigate, make sure that you irrigate early in the morning so that there's time for the leaves to dry over the course of the day. And you want to try and limit splashing as much as possible. I know that can be a lot easier said than done, but it's something that's really critical for a crop like peppers that are very sensitive to bacterial leaf spot. If you do see bacterial leaf spot, you want to try and make sure that you get that plant removed from your growing area and destroyed as soon as possible. It's best to bag it in place and then remove it from the premises. Please don't put it in the compost pile or try and reuse any of the materials that were used to grow the plant, anything like substrate or pots. We don't want to risk having that pathogen move from those materials into a future crop. So just destroy any kind of affected materials. And then also you can increase your air movement and reduce humidity. Those are all things that are going to help keep the canopy dry and prevent the spread of bacterial leaf spot pathogens. There are a few chemical control options. Our main ones are going to be copper products like Phyton that are effective against both fungal pathogens and bacterial pathogens. Also, there is Postiva, which on the label says that it does have a bacterial suppression effect. So it's not necessarily a first line defense. However, you can implement that in your rotation to hopefully help prevent any kind of bacterial issues. You can also use some different biological options, different bacillus strains that are available in products like Cease and Triathlon to help, again, more just to prevent that bacterial leaf spot disease. As I mentioned before, thrips are a huge issue, partially because they cause that initial damage, but also because they spread these two really important viruses, impatiens necrotic spot virus and tomato spotted wilt virus. They're pretty much vectored only by thrips. So making sure that you control thrips is the best way to make sure you can control these diseases in your crop. So you want to make sure you have an effective chemical rotation to control thrips and a good biological program if that's something that you're investing in your facility. It's also important to remove any weeds in the greenhouse, around the growing area, because these weeds can act as an alternate host, both for the virus and for thrips. And so making sure that you keep everything clean, get rid of your weeds is really, really crucial to controlling this disease. You can do in-house testing for these pathogens if you use something like immunostrips. However, it's also important to keep a diagnostic lab handy if you want to send in a sample just for testing's sake. If you're not sure if the symptoms you're seeing are due to these viruses, you can send it to a diagnostic lab and confirm whether or not it's INSV or TSWV. There are no curative options once you confirm whether or not you have this virus. So the only thing that you can really do is destroy any infected plants. Again, bag them in place, remove them, and get them out of your facility and destroyed as soon as possible. I will also note that we have some nice guides available on the Ball Seed website covering impatiens necrotic spot virus and tomato spotted wilt virus. So check those out if you need a little bit more information. So for the key takeaways for ornamental pepper production, sanitation, sanitation, sanitation. Sanitation is key. You need to start clean, and that's not just within your own facility, but also by getting good, high quality tested seed that's going to reduce any kind of disease problems downstream. You don't want to skimp on inputs. Peppers need a lot of high quality inputs, from fertilizer to light and heat. You need to make sure that you're giving them what they need to build a strong base and strong nutrient reserves early on and finish strong. And then you also want to make sure that you limit stress. This is especially important once you start getting into the reproductive stage to make sure that you don't have any loss in fruit or flowers, no leaf drop, no fruit drop or anything like that. So these are the main key takeaways. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Bill.
That's great information, Josh. Good and concise, but covering all the main things that we need to watch out for in ornamental pepper production. And as you can see on this screen, you can find dozens, if not hundreds, of tech-on-demand educational resources online. Josh mentioned a few in this video. The Pour-Thru test video that we've done, I'll put a link to that in the show notes, as well as our at-risk documents and videos on ornamental peppers and the INSV TSWV document. You can find all those links in the show notes. Every week I send a newsletter covering a range of cultural and technical topics. We've created hundreds of videos for growers of all skill levels. The Tech on Demand podcast is a great way to learn about technical topics on the go and to connect with a huge global network of more than 6,000 of your peers, I do suggest you join the Greenhouse Tech Team on Facebook. Just search Greenhouse Tech Team in groups, answer a couple simple questions, and I will let you right in. But Josh, thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure we're going to talk again because there are a lot more crops to cover, right?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Bill.
Awesome. I'm Bill Calkins with Tech on Demand, and on behalf of our entire team, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and take care out there.